It was the summer of 2014. I was 14 at the time. My family lived in an old farmhouse in rural North America. My parents didn't have a lot of money, and it was the only house they could afford after the last one was burnt to the ground. There was no carpet. The floors on the lower level of the house were old floorboards that clearly had the carpet torn from them, but the floors upstairs were brittle plywood. The house, like any other nasty old house, would creak and groan frequently. Sometimes the sound of the house settling was so loud that I'd wake up in the middle of the night and pull my blanket up to my nose. Sometimes it would happen and my hair would be in my eyes, causing my heart to race as I scrambled to see nothing but the light of the moon shining through my open window. One night the house settled, startling me awake. I brushed my hair from my eyes and tried to listen through the sound of my own heartbeat. I stared at the shadow of the tiny door to the attic that just so happened to be in my room, since my little brother was the one that got to choose his room when we first moved in. I stared into the darkness as my imagination tried to create every horror imaginable beyond that shadow. I couldn't tell if the door was closed or not, but my mind told me it was open and that a ghost was going to pop up at any second and drag me away. I folded the blanket over my head and closed my eyes. I was shaking in fear as the house started to settle, but this night was different. What I thought was settling turned into rustling from behind my walls. The thoughts of monsters from all the movies and shows I'd watched began to flip through my head like a picture show. There was a loud knock followed by dead silence. I was on the brink of tears for what felt like hours as the rustling began again, keeping me awake. Before I knew it, the light of the sun trickled through my blanket. When I pulled it off, I was relieved to see that the door was closed. The early August breeze poured cold wind into my room. Since I hadn't slept that night, I dozed off for a short while. Not too long after my nap, I was forced awake by my mother shouting from downstairs, "Allie, breakfast, now!" I sat up, pulled my brush out of my nightstand and did a few quick strokes through my hair before shuffling downstairs like a zombie. Unfortunately, whoever built that house had no idea what they were doing, and I had to walk through my brother's bedroom in order to get to the stairs. His room was tattered with dirty clothes and junk while the sound of gunfire blared from his headphones. He had no idea I was even there. When I made it to the last few steps, I looked around and listened for the clank of claws against the old wooden floor. I loved our dog, but for the love of God, if he caught me at the wrong moment, I was getting tackled to the floor and bathed in slobber. My dad was sitting at the dining room table while eating and looking at his phone. My mom was preparing my plate for me when I sat down at the table too. When he glanced at me, he asked, "You all right, sweetie? You don't look like you're feeling too good today." "No, I couldn't sleep. It sounded like there was something crawling through the walls." He smiled before glancing back at his phone. "Probably just got a rat around here or something. I'll set a trap up in the attic when I get out of work." I sighed and sat my head on the counter for a bit before my mom brought my plate over. "If we have rats, I want every single one of them gone, and for you to find out where they're coming from," she said while pointing at my dad. He took a sip of his coffee and replied, "Yup." My mom sat down and started eating too. She asked with a mouthful, "I saw Kaylee and her mom at Walmart the other day. Kaylee wants to see you again and stay here for a night or two, so she'll probably be coming over in a few days. Maybe you can actually get out of the house for once." I was pretty happy to hear that. Sleeping in that room alone was getting harder every night. Kaylee did end up coming over later that week, but every night before that was growing increasingly sleepless. The trap my dad set never went off, and he ended up setting up several more to no avail. When Kaylee came over, we went out to the party store that was a pretty long hike after she got some of her things situated in my room. We got back a little before sunset while we tried finishing our Slurpees before they became sugar water. When we got too tired to keep our eyes open, she set up her little personal fan for some noise since I texted her earlier in the week about how I wasn't able to sleep too well. Later that night, yet again, I was awoken by Kaylee shaking my arm from the floor. "Alessa, Alessa," she whispered. "What? It's the walls, isn't it? No, that door just opened." Those words sent a shiver down my spine, and my heart started to crawl out of my throat. We could barely see that the door was cracked open. The attic door had an actual knob that I made sure was locked every night, so I knew that it was absolutely unlocked and then opened. We stared into the shadow of the attic door for a moment, the moonlight casting a soft glow from the window before the slightest sound of that same rustling I heard from the past week caused us to blast through the door and down the stairs. We ran into my parents' bedroom. I'm pretty sure we startled them too, because my dad was on his feet in the blink of an eye. Same with my mom. "There's something in the attic! Something opened it! The door! Something opened the door!" I yelled in a panic. Kaylee was pretty much yelling the same thing at the same time. My dad wasted no time. He didn't understand us at first, but he was still making his way to my room when he asked, "All right, one at a time. What's going on?" Kaylee started to explain really fast. "The door! I watched the door open and then I woke her up, and then we heard a noise and we ran down here." We followed him up the stairs and passed through my brother's bedroom as my dad flipped every light switch on the way to my room. We finally got to my room. My mom sat with us on the bed while my dad took a look at the door. The door was closed again, and it was also locked. We pleaded with him that we both saw that it was open, and he took a look around inside the attic for a while. When he came out, he told us, "There's nothing in there, but I guess I can take a look behind the walls. It's late, so I'll do it in the morning. You guys can sleep in the living room if you want to. I'll get to it as early as possible." We slept in the living room on the couch that was right next to my parents' bedroom. We had a hard time getting to sleep, but we eventually dozed off while my dog, Doug, crawled back and forth between us. In the morning, my dad got to work removing the trim around the wall next to the attic. We watched him for a bit before we got bored and went back downstairs. We jumped on the trampoline for a while as we blared my big radio, as Doug sprinted around the backyard, stopping every now and then to bark at the animals just beyond the tree line that acted as a big privacy fence. There was no actual fence, so he could only run as far as his leash would let him. After an hour or two, a police cruiser pulled into our driveway as we watched two officers walk to the front. Kaylee and I glanced at each other for a second before running into the house. My mom wouldn't let us go upstairs while my dad and the officers talked about something too faint for us to hear. My brother was downstairs too. The officers came down and questioned me and Kaylee, asking things like, "Have you seen anyone around the house recently? Maybe the same person multiple times?" And, "Have you been missing personal belongings or been putting things in the attic?" I was scared and confused. I told them no, and that I've had absolutely nothing to do with the attic, and that I rarely leave my room. After that, one of them explained that the wall my dad opened was hollowed out, and the other officer placed a few things on the coffee table. There were a few pieces of my clothes, an old brush I'd lost the week we moved in, and a picture of me taken from only a few feet away while I was sleeping that was taken from our last house. And there was a badly drawn heart around my sleeping body. The subway is beautifully disgusting as always. The lingering smell of body odor and sweat, the feeling of a stranger's skin brushing against your own, the way everyone's voice morphs together to form one violent buzz as if we're all worker bees on our way to serve the queen herself. They say worker bees are simple-minded drones, working until they meet their demise. I envy that they're able to escape life so quickly. I begin to profile the unfamiliar faces around me and attempt to pass the time. Directly next to me stands a teenage boy, his hands gripping the worn grab strap. Greasy mouse-brown hair avoids my gaze and those around him. Across from me sits an elderly gentleman with cruel eyes and a deep frown. I count 4 pieces of hair. The rest of his head is covered in shingles. He appears to be glaring at me, but I'm starting to think that's just his natural expression. Before I can profile any more strangers, I feel a rough hand brush against my arm. Something stirs deep inside my mind, like a lightning strike of lost memories. My right eye begins to twitch. "What the fuck do you want?" I snap, immediately gasping in surprise. Did I say that? No, it didn't sound like me. The owner of the hand doesn't blink, nor does he speak. I decide to profile him. Mid-40s, around 5 feet 8 inches tall, gray eyes, face pale but oddly discolored and covered with sunspots. He's thin, much too thin. He looks emancipated, like the starving rats that scutter through the alleyways. Skin looks stretched, as if it wasn't made to fit his face. He has dark hair, almost black, and it has been neatly styled, wearing a black pinstripe suit, recently ironed, and paired with impeccable patent leather dress shoes. I stare at his mouth for a few seconds as my right eye continues to spasm. His smile is wide and toothy. It stretches from ear to ear as much as humanly possible. "Hello," the man shouts, despite my face being less than 2 feet from his own. I raise an eyebrow in reply. "Hello," he repeats before I can open my mouth to speak. He continues shouting, "Hello, hello, sir. Have you seen it? Have you seen it yet? Have you?" He speaks quickly, and a bit of his saliva lands on my cheek. I risk a glance at the people around and see that they've all turned to face the subway windows. Their mouths are still moving, but I can only hear the smiling man shouting. He hasn't stopped repeating himself. "Have you seen it? Have you seen it yet? Have you? Hello, sir." My left eye begins throbbing. "What the fuck are you talking about?" I shout over him. The man ignores my question and continues his chanting. His eyes are wide and bulging now, and streaked with red as though he hasn't slept in weeks. He begins talking even faster, his words incomprehensible. As I prepare to turn around and push my way through the sweaty bodies in an effort to get away from him, he falls silent. I don't think he's blinked yet. I can tell because his bloodshot eyes are watering profusely, the liquid dripping off the tip of his nose. He's no longer smiling. I'm not sure if the existence or lack of his smile disturbs me more. "Have you seen it?" the man whispers with dry, cracked lips. I suddenly realize the strange quiet around me. The buzzing of worker bees has ceased. "Seen what?" I ask, sounding breathless. I see the people of the subway out of my peripheral vision. They're all staring at me, their mouths open in death screams. "It has certainly seen you," the man whispers. Before I can react, he pulls out a small black handgun and presses it against his left temple. All at once, the silence is broken. I hear a blast and then a loud ringing noise. Both my right and left eyes throb. I feel something wet splash my cheek. The man grins at me one last time with what is left of his mutilated face before slumping into the seats next to him. I saw something last summer and I can't seem to get the scene out of my head. To preface, I'm pretty confident in my ability to defend myself. I used to wrestle in high school, and I go to the gym pretty frequently, so when it comes to fight or flight, I would like to think that I would stand my ground. I still have that opinion of myself, so I guess that's why what I saw bothers me so much. My reaction to it was, in my mind at least, stupid, and I often think about why I froze and chose to run when I could have approached the whole thing logically. Maybe it was the right decision, but I guess I'll never know. I think I'm getting caught up in the preface though, so here it goes. I was out for a ride with some friends, and we ended up going on for more than 6 hours and covered too many miles to count. I live in Nebraska, so at that point, the only thing we were passing were a bunch of small farms and cornfields. I was riding a sport bike, and if you could imagine, having your knees bent at a 45-degree angle and standing up on the pegs for hours wasn't comfortable, and I was starting to get some pain pretty much everywhere. So I decided to split off and head home. Out there were no lights, and the road was only illuminated by my headlight and the headlights of the occasional car. Road signs and mile markers seemed to repeat forever, and farm plots stretched for miles on either side. The only thing that broke the loud drone of my engine was the voice of the GPS lady through my helmet speakers. It was like I was the only one out there. About 2 hours in, my helmet speaker died. To be honest, I didn't really notice for about 30 minutes because it had me going straight for a while. I eventually stopped and took out my phone to turn my playlist on, but I noticed that I was set back another hour. In a panic, I took a good look at the GPS map and attempted to cover some ground before I had to stop and look at it again. I rode on for another 45 minutes, stopping every once in a while so I didn't miss a turn. Everything looked the same though, and I made so many wrong turns that I ended up even farther out than I originally was. To make matters worse, street signs were scarce, and the only evidence of another person were cars that didn't care to stop for a stranger at 3 in the morning. At some point, I took a break at a cross in the road to regain my bearings and take stock of what I had in my tank bag in hopes of finding some stray plug-in earbuds that I used in the gym. I was fed up with the situation and was desperately tired. I sat down and leaned up against my bike for a while so I could close my eyes. For a while, all I could hear was the wind blowing through the cornstalks. I heard the sound of tires gripping at gravel, and I stood up to move my stuff looking around. I saw no sign of a car or another person, so I dismissed the sound as me going crazy from the isolation. I took the opportunity to look through my bag again and finally pulled out my earbuds. I shoved the tiny speakers under my helmet and turned my phone's GPS back on. It was relieving to finally hear something that wasn't just the wind shaking around loose leaves. I swung my leg over my motorcycle to take off, but before I could, I saw something move in a ditch next to one of the roads. Thinking it was an animal, I got off to take a look. I was expecting a deer or a rabbit, but in the lowest point of the recess, I saw a person. I froze up and took a second to make sure what I was seeing wasn't just a blown away scarecrow. The figure was dressed in black and had a hooded raincoat zipped up to the neck. The clothing was loose, but I could tell that the person was extremely thin. Their hands were pale too, like what you would see in an old vampire movie. I could hear only my own breathing in my helmet as I watched the person standing in the ditch begin to quiver and sway. I just stood there, words stuck in my throat and eyes locked onto the thing standing in the ditch. The swaying got more and more aggressive as I watched, and every muscle in my body began to tense. My brain told me again and again to run. Suddenly, I gave in. I sprinted back to my bike and took off, kicking up rocks behind my rear tire. I didn't hear footsteps, but I could swear that thing was chasing me. I averaged 130 miles per hour on the highway, and the whole time, I felt like it was catching up to me. When I got home, I immediately went to my room and got into my bed, hoping the feeling would stop. I couldn't sleep that night or the next. I haven't had many sleepless nights since, but if I stay up for too long, I often hear timid knocks on my bedroom window. I haven't mustered the courage to look, but that thing has definitely found me. Edit. I saw the person again. Last night, I went to the gym and I usually stop on the way back at a park next to my house, except this time, there was someone waiting. I'm convinced it was the same figure I saw. The guy was standing on a park bench and was dressed up the same way and everything. The only difference was that it was completely steady as it watched me pass. It followed me home, and I don't think I can do anything about it.